I believe that there has to be a point in time when, as Rwandans, we're going to sit and then figure out that since there are so many of us who have committed crime, what do we do with it? What do you do with people who are in Arusha, people who are in the communes on the hills in Rwanda, people like Kagame who at some point is going to be found guilty of these crimes, and others within our own organization who might have committed crimes in Rwanda and the Congo? What are we going to do with all that? How can society begin to even imagine healing and repair when you still have a lot of this trauma that has gone on, that has so many victims? When perpetrators of today, they become victims of tomorrow. When victims of today become perpetrators of tomorrow. That is a vicious cycle. And we want to argue that we need to reimagine something new in which we can figure out how to stop the culture of impunity, but at the same time bring out the accountability, but most importantly, figure out how to move forward. And truth-telling is so fundamental, so disruptive. And so I imagine there are some people in the international community who are not comfortable with it. Now, the personal story. The personal story is that truth-telling is so redemptive at a personal level and has a healing effect at a personal level. But most importantly, it opens doors and creates bridges which you could not even begin to imagine. When I came out with this statement, one of the things that came to my mind was, why don't I actually call the widow of the late Habyarimana the president of Rwanda? Remember, I used to be in the rebel army, I used to be a leader of the RPF, and my enemy was Habyarimana and his government, and the Hutus in general. But once I came out with this, I said, but why don't I call actually the widow of this president and actually tell her and her children that I'm terribly sorry, even when I did not kill her husband, I did not conspire to kill her husband, but I know that I know somebody who did it, and once I knew the truth, it took me several years of going outside as a salesman, trying to convince the world that actually President Habyarimana and the other president of Rwanda and the others had actually been killed by the Hutu extremists. So I picked a phone and called the widow. I talked to her son and to her daughter, and I finally talked to her. I don't know really how to describe, and of course Rwanda has made a lot of noise saying, Theogene is doing it because he's looking for money. People who look for money in these types of things cannot even imagine that they are decent and morally upright people who can do it to redeem themselves and to help other people to redeem themselves. So Kagame always thinks money, thinks power. So he cannot think out of that kind of box. But in talking to this lady, you may wish to know that not only did Kagame kill her husband, but Kagame and RPF have made it a mission to go to France and to go to the International Criminal Tribunal and to go into the general public and say that actually this lady was part of the conspiracy and therefore she is at the center of having killed her husband so that herself and her brothers and other people could capture state power in Rwanda. Now, imagine, good people here. It's one thing to conspire to kill somebody, but why would a whole president who has absolute power in this nation of 11 million people, having killed the husband of this lady, why would he even go as far as telling France and telling other people that this lady is responsible to have killed her own husband? It's a double tragedy. And so when I talked to her, it was quite an emotional moment, and she told me that she's so happy that I've brought truth to the whole matter, and that she and her family had been waiting for this moment, and that they are praying for me, and so that it can happen to other people to come out. But you can imagine how this truth, how powerful it is in her own life and her family's life in trying to figure out a way forward. I say this personal story because to me that is more important than anything else, because if that story, and later on of course I called Mrs. Nariamira, who was the other president of Rwanda who perished in the accident, and I've talked to the children of the late Habyarimana, and one of them asked me a question. He said, by the way, what did you think about my father? What did you think about my father? She was asking me what I thought about the late President Habyarimana. And that was a very, very serious question. Because previously, I looked at all the issues of Rwanda through the prism of a strategic thinker for RPF, and everything was political, and had grown up in a refugee camp. I was coming back home, and so I'd been raised in the political culture of thinking that of the zero-sum game. And so I hadn't been asked, oh, what do you think about my father? What did you think about my father? And you know, for us parents, I have 4 children. Some of you have children, we know. We are our children's heroes. Of course, when they turn, they become teenagers, we're certainly villains. But when they're still young and probably much older, we are their heroes. And that was a very good question. I say, you know what, to be honest, I looked at your father from a political point of view. I didn't know much about your dad. I saw him once during the signing of the Arusha peace agreement. I was actually the guy who was doing the protocol for my chairman of the organization, and I could see President Habyarimana and the chairman of RPF here. I said I never came close to him. I said the other things which are personal I had from about your father, I had them from other people who joined the RPF, like Kanyarengwe Kano, who was the chairman of RPF, like Pastor Bizimungu, who used to work with the president, or who used to work in Rwanda, or people like Kaje Guhakwa, who were used to be in that organization, and others who knew him. So I said I didn't know much about him except the politics, that had been raised as a refugee, and therefore I was going back home, and his government was kind of resistant to the idea that people who have been in exile for too long should come back. And then she said, you know, our father was a very good person. She explained to me, and indeed, how else could a father be to a child? So I tell you these stories because truth-telling makes Kagame and company very angry. But for me and others who are engaged in this, it opens doors to reach out to the other side and to listen to how they are feeling. And I tell them also how I felt at that time. And in the hope of doing that, I think it does create potential for us. I took a bit of a long time to respond to that, but I think it's very important because in the last more than 30 days, time please, yes, yes, the timekeeper. It's very difficult to talk about Rwanda in a short time. And so I think it's very important to note that since this statement came out, many people, all through email, through telephones, they encourage me that it has had a very profound effect in their lives, and I believe we can build on that. Maybe we should go through the questions very quickly so that...
we can go beyond 6. So we have to go beyond 6. We have so many questions here. There's no way we can get through it in 5 minutes. So it's in the hands of our moderator.
Do the younger generations imagine themselves as Rwandans rather than the Tutsi, Twa, and Hutu?
Yeah, that's actually where our hope is. That one I can quickly answer. Because the young generation sometimes listen to us. Like one day I was taking my daughter, who is now 14, to school much earlier. And then she asked me, said, "Daddy, are we," she even disfigured it. She says, "Are we Hutu or?" And she simply doesn't relate to it. And for example, people who were born since 1994 may not be able to exactly relate to that kind of situation. But guess what? The issue of ethnic identity has been politicized so much, and people have become victims because of their ethnic identity, that even the young people in their own households, how the parents explain it, or if they are in a refugee camp, they are always reminded, like because I grew up in a refugee camp, it became very clear that I was a refugee because I was a Tutsi. So we have so many people who are Hutus, who are in refugee camps, especially in Africa. So that kind of identity and their plight reminds them that actually they are Hutus and they have been harassed. And for people in Rwanda, of course, the young generation goes through that. But still, I would say that our sure bet will be to work with the young generation, because they might be the ones who might not be strongly attached to this whole notion of being Hutu and Tutsis, but also to tell them that it's okay to be a Hutu, it's okay to be a Tutsi, it's okay to be Twa. There is absolutely nothing wrong being a Hutu, a Tutsi, or Twa. The danger becomes if you use that as a pretext of denying other people their rights, their responsibilities and obligations as full citizens of Rwanda who are equal before the law. And so we are also telling people to be comfortable in their own skins, that they need not hide behind anything and tell lies and say, "I'm not a Hutu," so that they can get a position in Kagame's regime, or to say, "I have a mixed blood," so that Kagame can accept them more. Or, as it happened even in the previous regime, sometimes people simply denied that they were not Tutsi in order to get certain positions in the government. So people need to be comfortable with their own ethnicity. But at the end of the day, as Ambassador Flatino was saying, we are all Rwandans. And I think that's what really matters.
How will the teaching of history in these schools be addressed? Part 2 of the question, what should be done with the 120,000 people in the prisons?
I very often say that in Rwanda we have 4 burdens. The first burden is the burden of history. If you close your eyes and you ask Rwandans to tell you the story of Rwanda, without looking at them, you can always know whether they are Hutu or Tutsi. So there is the burden of history, because each one of them highlights the wrongs that the other side has committed, and of course highlights the best that they have done. And yet it's a shared history, as we've emphasized. It also has the burden of a neighborhood. We live in a very dangerous neighborhood where flexing muscles is part of the game in order to survive. If you live in the neighborhood of Congo, of Burundi, of Uganda, you soon learn that it's the mighty that can exist in this tough neighborhood. It's some of the toughest neighborhoods, I think, on this planet. And sometimes there aren't so many good things to learn from neighbors. Instead, there are bad things to learn from neighbors. If you have a neighbor that has produced the likes of Idi Amin, genocide or killings in Burundi, continuing deaths in Congo, in Uganda, you hear so many stories. So what is the cheering news in this type of neighborhood? So we have a burden of a neighborhood. But we also have the burden of foreigners, because foreigners do not create problems for us. We create problems for ourselves, but it's also true that very often foreigners do not leave us alone.